everybody, thank you very much for all your questions. It's great to hear from you. I'm here at Broadcasting House in London now, and you can see the newsroom behind me. I'll just go through your questions. So what degree did you study and where? I studied English and French at Exeter University, which is in the southwest of England. I spent a year abroad in France as part of that degree, which was still the best year of my life. I would say the most important things that I learnt from that degree were things like analytical skills, being able to skim read, also writing and being able to tell stories and to understand the best questions to ask, the best ways to defend my points, and to make an argument. So it was a really worthwhile 4 years. When did you realise you wanted to be a journalist? I think I've always wanted to be a journalist. I've always known deep down it's what I want to do, but it took me a long time to get there. So I used to work for the Foreign Office, in the press office, so in a communications job. It took me some time to be able to move into journalism because it's not necessarily the easiest path that I could have taken. But I think I always knew deep down that I wanted to understand the world, to meet people, to hear their stories and to tell stories and also to write. Which story was the hardest to do and why? I think they kind of vary. So, I mean, often if I'm going to somewhere that's quite remote to do a story about an issue that's quite difficult, I find those stories personally quite difficult. So, for example, I did a programme in Zanzibar, which was on mental health, and I spent a week in an asylum, which is the only asylum on the island, and it was just very difficult to hear the stories, and it took quite a personal toll on me as well. So things like that can be quite tough and quite sort of shocking material. Also, I did one in Myanmar on the China border, which was about drugs that are being trafficked over the border and young people that are being exploited. So things like that can be quite difficult, but it's also great to do some lighter stories as well. Alvaro asked, what's the most enriching experience in your job? I think for me, it's about the people. So it's about going into people's homes, often being kind of in their domestic setting or at their workplace, and really understanding what that person's routine is like, what makes them tick, meeting their family potentially, and just getting a sort of slice of life to illustrate a sort of wider point that I'm trying to make in that story. So I can think of many examples of times that I've been into people's homes in Kenya, in West Africa also, but that's often the most enriching experience. Maria asks, what's the most shocking experience you've had while working abroad? I think I rarely feel shocked when I'm actually there on the ground. It's usually when I come home and I'm editing or listening back to material or writing that I tend to sort of feel the repercussions, also fully understand and grasp what someone's told me. So if somebody's been through a really traumatic experience, when I'm there, I'm just listening to what they're telling me and then sort of playing it back can sometimes be quite shocking. So that story in Zanzibar, for example, was quite difficult. Lots of sort of personal stories that were quite difficult about losing family members, really traumatic experiences that people have gone through. Yeah, that can sort of take its toll on me later on. What's it like to be a woman in your environment? I think it's great. I think it gives you advantages that you might not have as a man. So women tend to open up to other women in many cultures, and in most cultures I've found. It also gives you access to the family as a whole, so they might tell you things about their children and their lives. You understand about relationships and the dynamics there and the family as a whole. Women are often intrinsic to an entire community, so I think it gives you access in a way that other roles, if you're speaking to a man, for example, that it wouldn't. I think also when speaking to men, groups of men often, they sort of think of you as a bit of like a third gender, so you're neither like their women and you're neither like them as a man, but you're someone that's kind of come into their community and something that they don't really recognise, so that has its advantages as well. Jose asked, tell us about the issues surrounding women empowerment in the Middle East. I know very little about it. I've spent a fair bit of time there, but I couldn't say I'm an expert in it at all. I think most of the women that I've met in the Middle East have been very formidable, very strong, very bright, culturally, politically engaged. So I think for the most part they're already empowered, but that's probably just some of the women that I've met there. Jose also asked the second question, which is, if you could interview anyone dead or alive, who would you interview? Which is a great question. My sort of people that I always want to speak to or hear from are journalists. So there's a journalist called Michael Burke, who I read his book when I was at university, and he was the reason why I wanted to be a journalist. It'd be great to meet him. I really love travel writers and travelographers, so people like Simon Reeve. Louis Theroux makes amazing documentaries, so it would be people that make documentaries and programmes, usually about travel or adventure, that kind of thing. They're the kind of people I'd love to hear from. Thank you very much for your questions. Massive shout out to Yuge, who is amazing, and I hope he's also an amazing teacher to all of you. So thanks a lot.